do. And we welcome you. We acknowledge that we're all here not by chance. We're here by divine appointment. Do you agree? You heard the call, you answered, and we showed up. And 90% of life is what? Showing up. And when we show up in life, life shows up for us. It's amazing how that works, isn't it? And I have absolutely loved our theme for the month on intuition. And when we listen to the still small voice of God, be still and know that I am God. That energy of co-creation in the universe that allows us to move through the appearances, the conditions, and the effects that show up and not make those real. And they look real, don't they? We look at our bank balance, we look over here at maybe our body temple, we look over here at relationships. They look real. But Ernest Holmes, and I loved our Wednesday Night Live with our ministers in training, Lee Jason Friend and Robert Roy Conklin, earnestly speaking, when Ernest Holmes stated, these are facts. They are not spiritual realities. In the twinkling of an eye, all can change. All of that can change. So this morning is about going with the flow of intuition, the intuitive flow that is there with us. And I love that Robert Roy shared that when he was in New York City, you were playing the saxophone, is that right? And he said he needed an audition. And he needed to get to, he wanted this audition because he was living in New York City and he had never experienced a New York City winter. And it is cold when you're a California boy, right? So he said he made it to this, he had to make it to this audition. And he said because it was going to be on a ship to the Caribbean, and all he could think of was the warmth of the Caribbean. And he said, I didn't know where I was going. He said, I just wound up at Grand Central Station with an address, and I was like clueless. And suddenly, my intuition just said, does anyone know the way to this particular address where he was having his audition at the repertory? And one man said, I do. And he turned to the man. He had a white cane and he was blind. And he knew. He said, take my arm and I will take you there. And he took his arm and he just had his little white cane and all the way up the stairs and to the door and said, here you are. And he said, I went in. I was dressed to the nines. The instructor and the person hiring for this cruise said, you're hired. I didn't even audition. He looked at me, he got my vibration, and he said, you're hired. Wow. So when we use our intuition, the still small voice, and suddenly we're in Grand Central Station, and that's like the universe. Does anyone know the way? And God says, I do, because God has many disguises. And as Mother Teresa said, there is always a Christ in distressing disguise. I'll lead the way. That insight, that stroke of insight that Jill Bolton Taylor talks about when she had her stroke. And she wrote the book, A Stroke of Insight, that her life was never, ever the same. It opened up the right hemisphere of her brain, and she became an amazing artist from being a neurologist to an artist, an amazing artist. And one of my very, very favorite authors is Frances Mays. I love her work. She wrote Under the Tuscan Sun, and I am a follower of her writings because they're so creative, and she's so real. And I love when people self-disclose, right, and say, this is what I'm going through. And they did a film, Under the Tuscan Sun, which was absolutely wonderful. And I love that Diane Lane, she played the part. And she's going through a very painful divorce. Her best friend, Patty, tells her, you know, you're one of those people that are at the crossroads, that you have an opportunity to either go right or left. You're going to be one of these hollow people if you do not take life by the hand and run with it. And they're offering her a free trip to Italy. And it's one of these wonderful gay tours. He says, no one's going to hit on you. No one's going to, be interested in you. You're safe. And so she says, no, I can't. But then she goes back to what they called Camp Divorce, her her little apartment, and she has a very funny landlord. Asked her what she did. She goes, I'm a writer. I said, oh, yes. Well, next door to you, and you can hear the guy crying. He's going, he said, pound on the door and he'll stop. Just pound on that wall, keep pounding, and he'll stop crying. He's an attorney. And the man upstairs, he's a doctor. So he said, when the doctor prescribes the overdose of sleeping pills and the attorney makes out the will, you can write the suicide notes. And she goes, oh, you're one of those funny landlords, right? One of those very funny landlords. At that, she picks up the phone and she said, I'm going to Italy. When do I leave? Leaving Camp Divorce. And she gets on the beautiful cruise, and they all announce her, and they say, you know, this is Frances, and she's just been through a very painful divorce. She's straight, and everybody hears this, oh. It is just magnificent. And they're going through Cortona, and she sees a sign. And it's really fascinating. It's at a real estate window. And it's an old, run-down, beautiful villa called Brahma Soli. And she sees it, and this beautiful woman comes up and said, oh, are you going to buy it? She says, oh, no, no, I'm not. That would, with my state of consciousness, that would be a terrible idea. And she said, don't you just love those terrible ideas? Don't you love those? She gets on the bus. There's a herd of sheep. The bus has to stop, coincidentally, right in front of where? Brahma Soli Estate. And so she's looking at the sign, and she's taking it all in. You can see she's taking it all in. All of a sudden the bus starts, the sheep disperse, and she says, stop the bus! And she jumps off, and they're all saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? She goes in, and there's someone there buying the old villa. And their old Contessa's sitting there, and she's crying because she doesn't want to sell her 300-year-old villa, but she has to. And so Signor Martini is taking them on the tour, the realtor, and said, someone is here to see the house. And so this German couple comes through, and suddenly the Contessa, she's crying, she has her handkerchief, and she's speaking in Italian. Signor Martini says, well, the house has just gone up. In fact, it's doubled with the interest that's here. The interest was wonderful Frances that wanted to look at it, and this German couple. She goes, the German woman says, are you outbidding us? And she goes, well, I don't think so. I mean, well, how much is it? And so the Contessa, you know, they share how much it is, and she's had this settlement from her divorce. And the German couple, they leave. They're from Austria. And they're very upset. She goes, you Americans, you think you're all so entitled. She goes, yes, and a lot of us feel really bad about that. We don't want you to think badly of us. And so she said, here's what I received from my settlement. She writes it out. And she said, but what I'll need some tools. I'll need, some men, descendants of Greek gods to do the work, right? And she said, and I'll need this, and I'll need some chocolate, and I'll need a rental car to drive off the cliff when I realize I've made a terrible mistake. And she offers, this is the price I can pay. And the Contessa looks at it, she goes, oh, no, dear. I need a sign. I need a sign from God. And so Signora Martini says, she needs a sign. She goes, oh, I believe in signs. I believe in signs, and so I understand. And she gets up to leave, a pigeon flies through, and he deposits right on her head. Oh. And the Contessa says, oh, a sign, a sign, a sign. So the realtor, Signor Martini, has to explain to her, that's a very good sign in Italian. When a winged one deposits on your head. And I thought, mazel tov, blessings on your head, mazel tov, mazel tov. And so she buys this place. It needs all kinds of work. She hires some wonderful Polish guys to come in and do it, and all kinds of things are happening. And finally, she's given it her best, and she's losing sleep, and there's a storm, and it kills the washing machine that flies through the air and does all of this. And there's an owl sitting in her room, and she just said, you're going to be fine. Just don't fly around and creep me out. Just stay there. But an owl is also a very good sign, right? The owl, the Senor Martini comes the next day to see if she's all right. She's crying. She says, "What am I doing? I intuitively bought this place for a life I don't even have." And he said, "Well, Senora, a very interesting thing had happened. It's the legend of the train that goes from Vienna to Venice. That before there was even a train that went from Vienna to Venice, Venice to Vienna, they built the tracks. Because they knew someday a train would go through Vienna to Venice. And now there is a train that goes from Venice to Vienna." So, she goes, "But I want a family in this house. I visualized a family in this house. I visualized a wedding. And she just shares all of her dreams. And her son, she calls him her son, that she befriended, was one of the builders, a young Polish boy, falls madly in love with an Italian girl. The Italian father doesn't approve of the marriage because he doesn't have a family. And she said, "I'm his family." And suddenly, there's a wedding. Her best friend flies over, who is going to have a child. And her wife suddenly decided that she didn't want to be a mother. So she flies over by herself. She is very pregnant. And she said, "I mean, how do you have children here in Italy?" She goes, "Oh, we just put a knife under the bed to cut the pain, and you have it." She goes, "What?" She goes, "No, there's a hospital 30 minutes away, and you'll be wearing an Armani gown, It's okay." So suddenly a baby is born, and there's a family. It isn't how she envisioned it. But there it all was, the train that made it from Vienna to Venice. The life that she didn't even have suddenly appeared because she let intuition flow. And she told Senor Martini when she signed the papers, "I can't go back." See, we can never go back. The Bible states any man looking backward, cannot experience the kingdom of God. Any man putting his hand to the plow and looking backward cannot enter into the kingdom of God. Because that kingdom of God is within us, it moves forward, it's an upward spiral, because you are as close to God as I am ever going to get. I am as close to God as you are ever going to get. And if I am in that place in me, and you are in that place in you, we can say, "Does anyone know how to get to this address?" And the universe says, "I do." And it's God in disguise as a blind man with a white cane. "Take my arm. I'll lead you there, right to the door." This is how intuition works. That she had a beautiful, beautiful moment, a flashlight moment of illumination to live in this beautiful place, Italy, and to reconstruct a house. And she said, "What is a house?" "Oh, it's 4 walls that protects the dreamer." Protects the dreamer. That's what a house is. And to welcome all of our loved ones. And that it may not look like we thought it was going to look. It might look like a young man who helped us doing handyman work. And suddenly he's our son. And you're standing up for him at a wedding. And you're absolutely opening the space to allow God to do what God does best. And that it all unfolds miraculously. Miraculously. And our intuition can also be through dreams. There was one woman featured in Oprah magazine. Her name was Trisha Coburn. And she said, "I had a dream. And I was dreaming that there were 5 or 6 people, and they were very pale, and they were very frail, and they were reaching out to me, and they were speaking this language that I didn't understand." And I woke up, and it shook me. The next night, I went to bed, and I had a dream, the same dream. Only not 5 or 6 people, 12, reaching out to me, crying out to me in a language I didn't understand, and I awakened again, shaken. The third night I went to bed, it was like 20 people. reaching out to me, pale, frail, huge eyes, reaching out to me, speaking this language I didn't understand. I awoke crying and sobbing. My husband thought I was overreacting. I had a beautiful life. I had 3 gorgeous children, a magnificent marriage, and I had an art studio and painted away every day. I had a magnificent life. How could this be happening? And she said she made an appointment for her doctor. She insisted that the doctor take a blood test. That's the best she could do. They came back, they said, your blood's fine. Just let it go, whatever's bothering you. She said, I went home, I went to sleep, and there were 100 pale, frail, large-eyed beings reaching out to me, and I fell to my knees. And I just said, what is it? What is it? And I awoke crying. The doctor said all was well. The next night, no one appeared. Just the barbed wire fence that was always there with these beings looking through, just the barbed wire fence. And I fell to my knees. And I said, what am I supposed to do? And the voice answered, look deeper. I went back to my doctor. I said, what is the deepest part of our body? They said the colon. I had a colonoscopy. I wanted to be awake for it. And as the x-ray went through, suddenly the doctor said, oh my God, there's this black mass. And it was an aggressive cancer. It was fast acting. And within a month, she could have been dead. They found it that moment. They handled it that moment. She listened to the still small voice. She listened to the disturbing dream that was coming as a portent for the future. She listened. She acted on it. When we listen and act on the energy, there's life. There's life, there's aliveness, there's vitality, and there's health. And we may have to go through the dark night of the soul to reach it, but it is always there. I'm standing at Central Station in the universe. Somebody help me! And God in disguise says, take my arm, and leads me to the door. The door is opened, and when the door is opened, behold, I set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. I am received. I am gifted. I am in the Caribbean. I love how God works, don't you? I love how God works. So today, as I acknowledge each and every one of us who heard the call of the intuitive way to open our arms to life, because we know where we're going, and where is that? Higher yet. Where? Higher yet. Where? Higher yet. And so it is. God bless you.